let's go. What is conflict? I'm going to move. You guys, if you could really see my screen, it is crazy. There's so much all over it. So let's dig in. What is conflict? All right. So to begin with, I am going to share um, a definition of conflict that um, comes from the book Getting to Zero by Jayson Gaddis. And so that is a book I would highly recommend that you get. It is a fairly easy read, I think. And he includes a lot of exercises that you can do. So you don't even need to read the whole book at one time. You can read one chapter and really do the work that he gives you in that chapter. But he defines conflict as a rupture, a disconnection, or an unresolved issue between two people. And he calls that outer conflict, right? So, like when you get in an argument, it's out in the open. And then there is also the inner, what he calls an inner conflict. So, an issue inside of you, which he calls an inner conflict. And then I also want to share that with that inner conflict, it is also that thing that you're not saying. So that's what inner conflict is. It's that truth that you're not speaking. So it's not bringing what's bothering you out into the open. So, I did a post today on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm going to be doing another post, but it's like, um, we think that if we just keep it inside of us, we won't create conflict. But the truth is that we still have conflict. It's just bottled up inside of us. So what I'm going to help you do is really start to recognize, for me, people are at different points in their relationships, but I used to be a person that would argue a lot. I used to blame it on being Italian, but that wasn't a very good excuse. And then I really got to a point that I happened to marry somebody that is the opposite when it comes to conflict, just holds it all in. And so I could never get a rise out of him. So it seemed fruitless. So then I really went to the other extreme where I really started to hold it all in because I was afraid of how I would show up. All right. So that's still conflict when we're holding it inside of us. And it really creates disconnection. We think we're saving our relationship by not sharing those things, but it's creating disconnection all the same. So if you and your spouse aren't really fighting, I hear that from a lot of couples. I hear them say that they don't fight. Okay. Um, and sometimes that's a great thing. Maybe that means that you're actually hashing through your disagreements, right? But a lot of times, what that means is one is what we would call fawning or people pleasing or just catering to what the other person needs or wants. Okay. So, really pay attention when you think that you don't, if you are someone who thinks that, it's so good that we don't fight in our relationship. I've had many a person say that and then, have the relationship end. And why do you think that is? Because they're not working through their differences, right? Okay. So, with that definition that I am sharing with you, I'd love to hear in the comments um, either a thumbs up or a thumbs down when it comes to answering whether you currently have a disconnection or an unresolved conflict or issue with your partner or with somebody. It doesn't necessarily need to be your spouse. So, um, because as we go along, we are going to talk about, um, we're going to pick a particular conflict that you're working through and do some work on that. So while you're thinking of your own examples, um, oh, I'm going to change the next slide. So I want to have everybody think about an example that they are currently dealing with in a relationship. And ideally it would be an intimate relationship, but some sort of disconnection, and it could be an outer conflict or an inner conflict. um, and while you're thinking of some examples, I'm going to share some that clients have shared with me. One is having a spouse that maybe comes home from work and sits down and watches TV all night. Okay. Another one could be, and if anybody has one they want to share, hopefully I will see it in the comments. It could be thinking that you don't like the way your partner treats you or talks to you. Maybe they are short with you, or sarcastic. They're maybe critical, criticize, or very defensive. It could be, here's another one. I'm sorry, I'm going to look at the comments here in a second to see. Um, it could be wanting more connection, but not knowing how to express that. And so inside of you, you're, arguing with what is going on, but you're not able to do anything about it. So those are a few examples. If anybody has an example that they want to share, um, go ahead and do so. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have everybody who is here watching, I want you to take a couple minutes. If you don't have paper and a writing utensil, then pull out your notes app on your phone. But take a couple minutes to write down the name of one person you currently have an unresolved conflict with. And then I want you to write down what they did, what they said, or what that conflict is about. So go ahead and do that. And I will share a slide that has that on there so that you know. And if you're comfortable, go ahead and share in the comments a conflict you might see that you have with your spouse or anyone for that matter. And if anyone is struggling with figuring out whether something is a conflict or narrowing it down to one, please either share in the comments or raise your hand. Of course, I'm not looking at the Zoom camera, so I don't know if I would see a hand being raised. Or just come on, and I can help you before we move on to looking at go-to reactions for conflict. One thing I do want to say is that if you are struggling with picking a conflict, because maybe you have multiples, I would say for you to, in this exercise, pick the conflict that feels the least reactive to you. And what I mean by that is it feels less personal, it feels less large, it feels less emotional. Because as you do this work of working with conflict, it will be easy to, hi, Melissa. Um, it's funny. We got the same emojis on Facebook as we did in the chat on Zoom, for how they're feeling about conflict. As you do this work, your spouse even might be too close and too emotional for you to work with them. So then, in this conflict, so it might be that you start with somebody like a girlfriend or a guy friend, or a coworker, that you have a little bit of conflict with. Because then it will be less emotional. It's like, going to the gym and trying for the first time and trying to squat 225 pounds. It's go to the light weights, try it just the blank bar first. Okay. So there's a good analogy for all of my weightlifting friends. All right. So our response to conflict. If anybody has any questions as we go along, please go ahead and share them in the comments. Um, okay. Our response to conflict. And Elizabeth, we talked about this the other day on our call, but so this will be a little bit of a repeat for you, but it's always good to hear these things at different times. So before we actually look at how you respond to conflict, I want to share that our unique programming is set up to connect with others and to protect ourselves from danger. Okay. And naturally, protection will win out over connection. And to set that protection up in our minds, we typically will lean towards that negative, looking for what is wrong, right? Always searching for potential danger and real threats. Okay. And this is where a little shameless plug, this is where my Abundant Love free course is so helpful because it helps you see the negative thoughts that you're having and doing the work of starting to search for the positive and replace them with positive thoughts. And it's really not just like about ignoring the negative ones. It's about sometimes we get to this place in our relationship where all we're seeing is all the negative stuff. And so we have to start like, what is actually good here? And in that course, you actually create what I call a love list. And so it's like when you are thinking of them and you're angry and you're like complaining about the way they chew food at the dinner table, you have this love list that you can either pull out or you can just start to remember, okay, what is it that I love about them? Okay. So I created a little graphic to kind of share a little bit about what this looks like. Excuse me. I have had this cough that will not go away. Keeps me up at night. Anyway, because I'm a dog lover, and maybe you can hear my dog barking in the kennel. She's not happy right now. I love this comparative example that Jayson Gaddis shares in his book, where he talks about rescue dogs. And, that while they are happy to get this new loving owner, like over here, um, they are also extremely scared. In the background, they are still extremely scared because of what they've been through prior to this owner adopting it. Right. So, this is very similar to us because most of us have been hurt at some point in our lives and some of us, back before we could really make our own choices, we often act like a scared rescue dog in our relationships now. And it is kind of like it is our coping mechanism. So to remember that, to understand that, and to really like in our relationships, be able to see what's going on in our heads with our partner and possibly have a little empathy for ourselves, a little compassion for ourselves, being that, I don't want to necessarily compare ourselves to dogs, but like that rescue dog who has ingrained in them the coping mechanism to protect themselves, right? Okay. So, let's see what I've got next. So, when you're feeling judged, criticized, blamed by your partner, you may perceive a threat. Subconsciously, your spouse might resemble a previously unsafe situation. And though you cannot turn off this instinctive fear reaction, you can learn to recognize it coming and decide on purpose how you want to handle the conflict to ultimately create that connection rather than disconnection. All right. So let's look at how we react to conflict. It's really the fear reactions. Many of you have probably heard of the fight or flight or fawn reaction that we have to fear. So sometimes we will react to conflict, we'll defend, we'll argue, and we'll fight for our perspective. Sometimes we will withdraw, we'll be quiet, we'll endure the conflict within, right? We won't talk about it. Or we might give in. So we betray ourselves in a whole different way. We betray our position and we let them be right. Now, there is a difference between doing that and being mad at yourself for doing that and just like people pleasing, hoping that they'll treat you better if you just do that, and just being all in on yourself and that your position doesn't, it's not really that big of a deal. What I want you to know is that being right isn't important. We have two different opinions, right? I'm not going to even get into all of that. But the goal, and this takes time, is to learn how to listen, to learn how to connect with what is happening in your body in the moment, to get to the place where you can start to share your perspective from a place of empathy, love, and connection versus needing to be right, anger, defensiveness. Um, I call them low energy emotions versus a high energy emotion. So, a high energy emotion would be like love and compassion and empathy versus low energy. Any low energy emotion is not going to give you good results when it comes to relationship conflict. Low energy emotion would be anger, frustration, annoyance, needing to be defensive and critical. So when you recognize your common conflict reactions and begin to start feeling comfortable, um, if you feel comfortable sharing them in the comments, go ahead and share what your go to response is. And I will share that often, depending upon the situation, you may react differently. And again, the giving in isn't necessarily a bad thing. You might be just like, well, this is no big deal. I'm just going to let it go. And then you let it go. It doesn't bother you anymore. Conflict is when you continue to hold on to it inside of you. All right. So, on with the exercise. Becoming aware of our reactions doesn't mean anything. I think that, okay, becoming aware that our reactions to conflict doesn't mean anything negative about us as an individual. So, even going back to, when I was talking about how I love to get in arguments, part of that is often, it was for me, and it is often, I see it in couples and in my clients, is we want some excitement. That fight makes us feel excited. Think about actually being in nature when you have to fight for something, when you're protecting yourself, that gives you an adrenaline boost. So some people are somewhat addicted to the feeling they get when they get in an argument. Okay. And that's, but none of these, this, your reaction doesn't mean anything about you as an individual. It's just something to look at and to help understand that these reactions are normal. And it when we start to see why, understand why we're acting the way we are, it can help us also start to see a different perspective when it comes to the other person, right? And how they handle conflict. It helps us to start being curious about what they're going through, why they're being defensive, why they're being critical, why they're shutting down. So now grab your notes again when you think about the conflict that you named earlier. Can you describe, and I'll pull up the slide. Can you describe or define what emotion you feel when you think of this person and the conflict you have with them? Okay. And write down what it could be as simple as it feels good or it feels bad. Highly unlikely that it feels good. But then if you can come up with an emotion, um, write that down. If you feel like sharing, go ahead and do that in the comments. Um, and then, and maybe even describe that emotion, how it feels in your body, and then rate the strength of this emotion on a scale of 0 to 5, with 5 being completely unbearable. And then if anybody feels like sharing their number in the comments, go ahead and do so. Um, and remembering that this exercise that we're doing here in class is something that at the very end, when we do the last part of the exercise, you can do a screenshot of that. This is something that you can do with any conflict that you have. Maybe right now you can't think of any conflict. Um, but when you walk away from the class and you start living your day to day, you will start to notice some conflict that you might be experiencing in your world. All right. So I don't see any questions. So I am going to move on to what causes conflict. And any of you that are out there watching, I want you to come back if your brain has sort of run away and gone somewhere else. Pull it back in. I have one more thing to talk about before we get into the 3 action steps I want you to take this month. We're going to talk lastly about what causes conflict. And it's different than what you might think. You might think that the conflict is because you don't agree with that other person, or that person is not doing what they need to do to make you feel better. But I'm going to share, when we look at the definition that I shared of conflict, it being a rupture, a disconnection, or an unresolved issue within ourselves or between ourselves and someone else. What causes those ruptures? Most of the time, we look outside of ourselves, and that person is the cause of the rupture. And that might be. Okay. So, one, I want you to remember that often we are seeing our spouses, our partner, the other person in the conflict, as reflections of past experiences. Remember the scared dog thing. And this is 100% subconscious. Like, you're not thinking, oh, they remind me of this person and they're doing exactly what it is. As a matter of fact, I actually had a conversation just this morning about something in my relationship. And I was just talking about facial expression. without getting too personal. And I was just saying, it just makes me like think that you're mad or something. And he's like, have I ever hurt you? And, we were on our way. He was going to work. I was going to the office. But um, afterwards, I was like, no, of course he's never done anything, but it is still subconscious and it's very human, right? When we see somebody like that looks angry, we're not like wanting to warm up to them, right? So, it's completely subconscious that we're doing this. Okay. So, what I mean is that if we've had a threatening relationship dynamic in early childhood, and it doesn't need to even be big T trauma, right? What I mean, we may be putting that other person in that same character position while guarding ourselves from getting hurt without even knowing that we're doing that, right? So it's now that you're aware of that, you can start looking for that and kind of seeing if being curious if that is what is going on. Often it is. And then, secondly, at their core, conflict is caused or triggered by when we feel threatened. Okay. So this could be your emotional or physical health or safety. It could be a threat to your identity, a threat to your values, your morals, your property, your loved ones. Think about um, children. When you see somebody acting a certain way to them, they're very close to your heart, right? So it's a common reaction to want to protect them. So, what causes this feeling of being threatened? Either the idea that there's too much closeness or there's too much distance. Okay. And it seems a little silly maybe to be threatened by both. But because we are social beings, we are sensitive to both forms of attack, which, we're threatened to both um, threats of attack, which would be too close, and threats of abandonment or too distant. Okay. So let's look at too much closeness. And I'm going to go through this super quick so that we can get to our action steps and any coaching that anybody might. If anybody thinks they might want some coaching, please put something in the comments. Like, I don't know, let's say a heart, or let's see, a hand in the, I don't know, a thumb up maybe, so that I have an idea if somebody has questions or coaching, so I can kind of gauge what I want to cover and what I don't want to cover. So, too much closeness, that would look like somebody moving towards you confrontationally, raising their voice, getting bigger physically through body language, talking too much. So, this can be like when women talk to their spouses like girlfriends. And I'm not saying that this is bad, but sometimes we are talking so much, they feel like claustrophobic. So, they're seeing it as a threat. And it's not like it couldn't go the opposite way. So totally could. Talking too loudly, furrowing eyebrows. Guess when I added that one? Angry look. Guess when I added that one? Pointing fingers, screaming, yelling, threatening body movement. Um, and then examples of too much distance. They would be actions that could be interpreted as the other not caring or not wanting anything to do with us, silence, leaving the room without saying anything. Okay. So I often talk about pausing in the middle of a conflict when you recognize that you're emotionally out of it, right? Like you are no longer in the conversation, and coming up with a signal in the podcast, uh, emotional regulation. Um, Search awaken you in your marriage, emotional regulation, and I talk about that in that episode. But What I'm talking about here is just picking up and leaving and not saying anything about what's going on with you or leaving the house, turning away, looking away. And these are things to think about it because they are things that we commonly do that we don't think anything of. Slamming doors, slamming cupboards, cutting someone off during conversation, not returning calls or texts, or avoiding difficult conversations. So we really dislike silence the most because we dislike not knowing what's going on. So getting triggered is normal, but staying triggered is very unhealthy for your mind, your body, your health, and your relationships. Okay. Last thing in the exercise, with the example that you're going with in this class, what do you think is causing the conflict? Do you think it's too much closeness or too much distance, or maybe a little bit of both? So think about that. And of course, you can look at that later as well. All right. Any questions? I'm going to pause. I'm going to check in with everybody. Is everybody here? Is everybody present? I know before this class I was tired, but now I'm super energized. My mouth is dry, but let's get into the action steps. Elizabeth is present. Awesome. And it looks like, oh, I don't have the Facebook pulled up. Sorry. All right. So here's what I want you guys to do this month. All right. I first, and these are on the slide, are very brief. So you can screenshot it if you want, but practice being present in the moment. This is practice, practice, practice. For those of you that have gone through the mental fitness program, you are ninjas at being present. I know it. But it's always a practice that you have to keep practicing. I have to remind myself constantly when my brain starts to freak out to come back to the moment that everything is fine. So different this month, I'm going to share a different practice from last month. So every month I share something a little different. And of course, you can certainly go back to other months if you want. They're all on the Facebook page, so you can reference them there. I don't know if they're on a particular tab or what, if you have to scroll. But last month, we talked about the hands over the heart. And sometimes when we're in the middle of conflict, that's not something that we can do. I suggested that you practice doing it as you lay down to bed, when you wake up in the morning. The action itself of putting your hands over your heart calms your nervous system down. But this month, I did have you do a mantra last month that had to do with self love. But this month, something to the effect of closing your eyes. So when you're in conflict with somebody else, if it's like in the moment, you can do several different things. You can just feel the weight of your feet on the ground, or if you're sitting, your seat on the chair. You can look in, maybe you feel uncomfortable looking into the eyes of the other person you're having conflict with, but notice the detail in their face. Don't turn away. Maybe you can't look at them. Maybe you have to look at something that's in the room and just really notice the detail. Okay. Breathe. Feel the air coming through your sinuses. And then a mantra you can say in your head is one. And of course, this is if you are safe. I'm not talking about actual physical invasion of your space, but saying in your brain that you are safe, that you can let your guard down, that you are fully lovable right now as you are. Those are three things that you can start saying this month, um, that you are safe, you are okay, you can let your guard down. You can feel the body wanting to put its guard up and just help it to know that you're safe and relaxed. Number two, I want to watch my time. All right. This month, I'm going to take a tip right out of that High Five Habit from Mel Robbins. If you haven't read that, excellent book, easy read. You're going to get out of bed when your alarm goes off. Force yourself out of bed if it's difficult. Throw the covers off, throw your legs over the side, and make yourself stand up. Go into the bathroom, look yourself in the mirror and in the eyes in the mirror. Really see yourself, and then give yourself a high five. Touch the mirror. Do that every day this month. I know it's going to feel silly to begin with. It's going to put a handprint on your mirror. No big deal. You can wash it off. All right. And I wrote a note here. If you added a self-care action into your morning routine last month, I would love for you to share it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you did and how it went. Okay. Third thing, and then we're going to wrap up. Maybe you've already read through, come back. If you've read ahead, emotion work. Okay. Emotions are how we connect with others, right? It's through our emotions that we create connections. So understanding what we're feeling and how that emotion is impacting our connection is the first step towards learning how to experience the emotions that create healthy connection. Okay, I kind of alluded to this during the class. So, the first step, I want to make sure that um, my notes are correct. So, the first step is that emotion that you discovered today when you were doing the work of recognizing the emotion that this conflict was causing for you. I want you to pay attention to that emotion, start noticing how often it comes up during your day. And then I want you, from what you learned today, ask yourself why you think you might be feeling like this. Take a few minutes to write about it. And then I want you to write down and kind of just journal about how you act or what you do when you are feeling this emotion. Really starting to learn about yourself and, how you show up when you're feeling conflict. All right. And then the second thing is I want you to think, and this is work for a month, and I'll talk about how you'll do this for the month, but I want you to think of one emotion you'd really like to experience in your relationship or in your life in general on a daily basis. Maybe it's joy, maybe it's peace, maybe it's connection, maybe it's courage. I don't know for you. Maybe it's love, maybe it's compassion, maybe it's empathy. These are all high energy, high vibration emotions. Okay. Um, and then I want you to take some time to think about and write about why you want to feel this way. I know this seems silly, but as you ask yourself these things, you might not know the answers right away. It's okay. You have all month to work on this. As you ask yourself these questions, your brain will start coming up with answers. often we don't ask ourselves these questions. So we have no idea how to answer them. And so be patient with your brain. If you haven't done this work before, be patient with it and keep asking it. It will start as you start paying attention to this stuff this month, it will start to come up with answers. And then the second thing, um, if you felt this way in your relationship on a more regular basis, how might you act or what might you do? Okay. And take some time to write about that. And this can be, like I said, a continual project that you work on. Um, the last thing, and then I want to come back to something. Oh, I have the questions to share too. Practice. The third thing is practice embodying this emotion on a daily basis. Okay. Think of thoughts that make you feel this emotion and then check in with your body to see how they feel in your body. And you can actually, I will share um, podcast in the comments. But if you go to episode 23, actually, and I'm working on a free course with some of this work. But episode 23, I talk about how to process emotions, and it will help you identify what's going on in your body. I want to check in to see if anybody has any questions before I address the questions that were asked on registration. So I will be checking the comments for anybody. I'm going to grab some water and then we're going to wrap up. So, one participant asked, what is the next step in managing emotions well? From when you recognize and heal from behaviors and actions that trigger and hurt. Okay, so I'm going to read that again. What is the next step in managing, being able to manage emotions well? From when you start to recognize and heal from behaviors and actions that trigger and hurt. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that this person is starting to recognize what things trigger her. Okay, so that's like the scared dog. Um, like if the scared dog could have a human brain, it would recognize, a human maybe jumping really fast, that okay, they know that this person loves them. It's okay, nothing bad is going to happen. And that over time, that dog can be reconditioned if it has that awareness. And actually, dogs can be reconditioned because I used to rescue dogs, but there are stages of awareness, right? Okay. So taking time to process the emotions that come up for you, like I talked about, and understanding why they're there. What are those emotions that are coming up for you? Um, and now that you're seeing these common reactions that you have to certain triggers, to certain actions that other people take that hurt you, um, that is that first level of awareness. And then recognizing that these reactions that you're having might be coming from something old, an old instinctive coping mechanism, and then deciding again that, like what I shared, how you want to show up for yourself, how you can like calm yourself down by being present, being in the moment, telling yourself that you're safe, that you're okay, that you are loved, and that you can let your defenses down. And again, this is different than if there is actual physical abuse, then you have to remove yourself from the situation. Um, and then there's also, I really love thinking of my inner child, my younger version of myself, and how I would stand up for her in any abusive interaction, if it's verbal. abuse, being able to say, hey, I don't appreciate you talking to me that way. And that's coming from a place of love and compassion for yourself. Okay. So when you say it from that emotion, it comes up differently. So hopefully that was helpful. Um, how, second question, how do I start stepping into being honest about what is bothering me without creating old reactionary relationship dynamics? Great question. It is the work of what we did today, starting to recognize those old reactions, recognizing what's going on for you, recognizing how these emotions feel in your body. That's why this emotion work is so important and so empowering. And then really seeing what your truth is, and then finding space and time to sit down, one with yourself to figure all of this out, which is part of the work that we did today. And then planning time to sit down with the other person to share how you're feeling. This will have to be done from an emotion that is that high energy, like love and compassion, like I talked about, versus the low energy. And this can happen once you understand why you are acting and feeling the way you are, and then really asking for time to talk openly about it. And then during that conversation, being able to watch yourself and see what's coming up for you, and then being able to pause if you need to and take a time out when you're noticing yourself dip into negative energy and reschedule the conversation. Sometimes it takes many, many times. Okay. So, um, this month, what I shared with you was information about what conflict is, our go to responses to it, and what causes our reaction. And then I shared those 3 action steps that I have kept up on the board for you. Um, and and start taking those steps this month to begin recognizing conflict when you experience it, start understanding your reactions to it, and this will allow you to process on your own and come back to the discussion in a different emotional state and with a modified plan to reconnect. So thank you for hanging in there. Every month, I focus on one of the many ways you can change your marriage without changing your spouse. And you can go back and listen to the replays from my Facebook page. Next month, it will be always the second Thursday of the month, 5 p.m. Central Time. Next month, I'm going to be talking about boundaries, what they are, and how to start implementing. All right, you guys, thank you so much for hanging in there. And the gift. The gift is a free 30-minute coaching session, which I will share in the comments. You can also, I think you can go to my website and get it if you're on my mailing list. It is in the newsletter that I share every Saturday morning. And that's what I have for you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening on replay, and I will see you all next month. Ciao.